Welcome to The Story. I'm Evan Watson in for Pat Doris this week. In the Portland metro area or other spots, snow may be a bit of a rarity, something that generates buzz, affects you a few times a year, but not always top of mind. Of course, in the Cascades or elsewhere, it's a far bigger deal throughout the winter, but warming trends are affecting snowfall on a macro level. The lack of snow and what will melt later leaves a, well, trickle-down effect. Tonight, it's our big story and the start of a week-long series from our Environment Northwest team. The snowpack in and around the Pacific Northwest is shrinking significantly, and it's only getting worse. The impact is, well, widespread. All week long, our team is looking at what's happening in western and eastern Washington, in Idaho, and here in Oregon. We'll have a different story for you each night, looking at what's happening now and what it means for the future.
I'm meteorologist Leah Pizzetti in the Cascade Mountains, about 50 miles east of Seattle. We're in the heart of an El Nino winter, and we can certainly see those impacts. But experts tell me there's a big picture issue at play here. In the last 75 years, our snowpack has decreased as much as 50 to 60%. Tomorrow, I'm talking to the people who live, work, and play here and are feeling those impacts. But it's not just Western Washington. Meteorologist Jeremy Legoo is in Spokane with how that region is feeling the impacts of two mountain ranges.
Here in the inland Northwest, we sit in the rain shadow of the Cascades, but we still boast pretty incredible snow totals up in the mountains. However, warming temperatures are eating away that snowpack. We're seeing less and less, especially in lower elevations. And as winters warm, the duration of that snowpack isn't lasting quite as long. In Washington, Oregon, and Idaho, that snowpack plays a vital role in summertime irrigation, and the early snowmelt is having detrimental impacts on farmers. Sophia Bliss is in Boise to explain.
In southern Idaho, snowpack and reservoir levels are essential for a successful irrigation season and for farming. For our current systems that capture water, like dams and reservoirs, they work best when we stay within historical norms. That way, we get a slow, gradual melt in the spring, and several of those norms are shifting, including the snowpack. In drier years, water managers have ended the irrigation season early, creating pressure for farmers. We'll hear from a local farmer who's worked in this area for about 25 years. He'll share the trends he's been seeing and the impacts he's felt. This isn't the only industry feeling the heat. Cale Williams is in Oregon with how the changing snowpack is changing the salmon population.
We're here in the Central Oregon Cascades, right around 4,000 feet. And a scene like this, where it's snowing at this elevation, is going to become increasingly rare in the coming decades. That's because of a larger warming trend caused by climate change, which is pushing snow levels up. And that's impacting salmon and the people who rely on them for their livelihood. We'll talk to some of those folks and the people working on solutions.
Our team's special series on the shrinking snowpack, highlighting all of those different angles, is coming your way each day this week, right here on The Story. Now let's get to the latest on Oregon's Measure 114, the gun control law passed by just over 50% of voters back in November of 2022. Despite its passage, it has never taken effect thanks to lawsuits at the state level. Most recently, a circuit court judge in eastern Oregon's Harney County ruled 114 unconstitutional as it relates to the state constitution, striking down the law altogether. But the state has not stopped trying to revive the law. Friday, state lawyers filed a new motion with the Oregon Court of Appeals, arguing the Harney County judge got it all wrong and a stay should be put on his ruling, which would allow 114 to take effect. They asked the court to expedite this appeal. And before we dive into this new motion, let's give a quick refresher on what 114 would do if it ultimately becomes Oregon law. The big element is a permit to purchase requirement, meaning you need to apply and pay for a permit before buying a new firearm. 114 would also ban the sale and manufacture of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds of ammunition. There are all kinds of intricacies within each of those elements, and we've discussed them all here on The Story before, but let's stick with those basics for today. The Harney County judge, Robert Raccio, ruled that both elements of 114 violate Article 1, Section 27 of Oregon's Constitution, which reads, "The people shall have the right to bear arms for the defense of themselves and the state, but the military shall be kept in strict subordination to the civil power." The state argued that 114 is intended to reduce things like mass shootings and homicides, but the judge ruled that they failed to prove that either element would promote public safety. In this new motion, state lawyers basically say the judge, in their opinion, is way off. Here are just a few excerpts. The trial court's errors are basic and fundamental. Later they write, by ignoring precedent, misconstruing the statute, and repeatedly applying incorrect legal standards, the trial court disregarded the will of the people and forestalled their efforts to protect themselves from gun violence. In doing so, the trial court arrogated itself policy-making authority on a matter of great public import and safety. Under the Oregon Constitution, that authority properly belongs to the legislature and through the initiative process to the people. Basically, the judge overstepped his authority, and Oregon voters have the power to make policy, which they did approve in November 2022, albeit by a thin margin. It should come as no surprise that the plaintiffs in this case, those who want 114 gone, oppose this new motion and intend to file a response of their own. That hasn't happened just yet, but we'll keep you posted when we see it. It's worth noting that in a separate federal trial, a judge found 114 did not violate the Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. But that ruling doesn't supersede this state case, which is what has kept 114 off the books for well over a year. Today we're hearing from Portland City Commissioner Rene Gonzalez reacting to the release of video from a MAX train where he says he was physically accosted. He says this is part of a string of attacks on not only him, but his family and staff too. But the voice of this latest incident has many wonder, the video of this latest incident has many people wondering when any accosting took place on the train. It appears to show an interaction where a woman simply brushed shoulders with him and then said something to him later. Blair Best has the story.
Look closely. Newly released video, first obtained by the Oregonian, shows the moment Portland City Commissioner Rene Gonzalez says a woman accosted him while riding the MAX train earlier this month. He says she bumped him on the shoulder and leg.
She came in from behind and sort of surprised me. In some ways, it's consistent with what I remembered. You know, but it's hard to get full context, right, from watching a video.
We've blurred the faces of the other people on the train, including that woman, because Portland police investigated and determined there wasn't evidence of a crime. The video goes on to show when Gonzalez says she sat down in front of him and started criticizing Portland's homeless policies.
She wasn't necessarily screaming or yelling. It wasn't, that temperature, but the combination of contact and then just engaging in critique of policy was what was concerning at the time.
Given this was one of more than a dozen alleged attacks, both physical and verbal, on Gonzalez and his staff dating back to June of 2022. They keep track on this paper.
It's part of a pattern, and we are inclined to speak up and not stay silent about it.
Their records show 2 unreported vandalism incidents at Gonzalez's home before his family member's car was set on fire there last month. Detectives believe it was arson.
And this is a really significant degradation in our democracy in the city of Portland.
Gonzalez is not alone. His staff, including Communications Director Cassidy Van Domlin, was attacked outside City Hall late last month. It's unclear if it was related to her job.
And he just kicked me in the knee, and then he called me the B word. I felt terrified, honestly. I mean, I had no idea why this man did it.
So you look at the whole thing, we've got to speak up. We can't allow people to intimidate on these pieces, and I have a responsibility to protect my family, my staff.
Do you think if this continues, would it push you to drop out of the race for mayor?
Absolutely not. We cannot be intimidated on these pieces.
Now, in past years, Mayor Ted Wheeler and Commissioner Dan Ryan have also experienced similar threats, but Commissioner Gonzalez believes he is the current target given his stance on homelessness and public safety, and he tells us he's increasing his security. Now, we also asked the other 2 commissioners who are also running for mayor if they've experienced similar threats, and they said not nearly on the same level as Gonzalez. Blair Best, KGW News.
Thank you, Blair. Up next, David Molko got an exclusive interview with the U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg today. They talked a lot about airline safety, but we wanted to press him on what to expect with the new I-5 bridge project. It's not often he's in town. Are more federal funds on the way? How dire is the bridge condition right now? Details when the story returns. If you've been watching the earlier shows here on KGW, you likely saw some of David Molko's exclusive interview with the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. They focused a lot on aviation safety in the wake of the Alaska door plug incident. But we wanted to know what Buttigieg had to say about the new I-5 bridge project between Portland and Vancouver, a project that recently received $600 million in federal funds, but which still needs a lot more.
Is there more federal help where that came from to help get it done?
Well, I'm not going to make any news about grant announcements besides the $600 million that we're celebrating this week. But what I'll say is funding this project has required funding from multiple sources. And it's really been the willingness of the state of Oregon and the state of Washington to step up and lead with their own funds, as well as come to us and match those to federal funds, that's making all of this possible. This falls into a category of projects that are so large and so complex that they really would not have been possible, just would not have gotten over the finish line until the president's infrastructure package passed. That's why some of these programs were created in the first place. That's why we're excited to be able to bring these federal dollars to the table.
How would you describe the condition of the 107-year-old span?
Let's call it not good enough. And, you know, this is a vital connection, as anybody who makes that crossing knows. This is not something that we could easily work around if for any reason it were to go out of service. And while there are many bridges that have in common that they're nearing the end of their life, there are not a lot of bridges that have the particular amount of pressure, the economic significance, the amount of commuters that this I-5 bridge does. You add to that the seismic resilience, the question of making sure that every facility from this airport to our roads and bridges is ready for what could happen seismically. Just demonstrates just how urgent it is to get this done. I don't think there's been a lack of urgency. After all, there was an effort a decade ago to get this done. It's really been a lack of funding, and we're here to change that with these federal dollars from the president's infrastructure package.
Now, the Transportation Secretary will get an up-close tour of the bridge tomorrow. We plan to have a crew with him, and we'll bring you that tomorrow night right here in the story. Let's stay on our bridge theme for a minute to talk about a different Columbia crossing and answer one of your viewer questions. Last month, the feds announced a $200 million grant for a new Hood River Bridge. And last summer, we told you about a major toll hike on the current bridge to help fund the replacement project. But those stories got some of you wondering, why does the current Hood River Bridge have a toll in the first place? Steve wrote to us, the Downs Bridge just had a whole lot of maintenance and nobody charged us for it. Maybe in our taxes somewhere, but not a toll on the bridge collecting it. It makes me wonder why one bridge can be free and the other one has a toll, and they both cross the same river. Maybe it's a state bridge and the other one is privately owned? Our team got to work on that question. It turns out Steve's guess is pretty close. The Downs Bridge is likely like many in Oregon, owned by the state in the form of ODOT. But the Hood River Bridge is owned by the Port of Hood River. And Oregon's only other toll bridge, the Bridge of the Gods, is owned by the Port of Cascade Locks. That difference matters because ODOT has access to the State Highway Fund, which is where your gas tax dollars end up. They can use that money for road repairs and bridge maintenance. In fact, the Oregon Constitution says that is the only thing they're allowed to spend it on. The ports, on the other hand, are not so lucky. They can't access those gas tax dollars, so they need another way to fund bridge maintenance. And what's that method? Tolls. Now, that's the short answer, but you don't watch the story just for the short answer, of course. So let's go a little bit deeper into this. Why are there only two bridges owned by ports in Oregon? And even if they can't use the gas tax, why do the ports use tolls instead of funding bridge maintenance some other way, like local levies or business fees? It goes back to when the Hood River Bridge and the Bridge of the Gods were first built. Both bridges were originally built by private companies in the 1920s, and those companies, of course, charged tolls. They were not acquired by the ports until about 30 years later, and it turns out the ports weren't the first ones in line. The private owners of the bridges approached multiple public agencies in the 40s and in the 50s to see if they wanted to buy the bridges. According to ODOT, when the agency was offered the chance to buy the Hood River Bridge, they said, in other terms, we'll pass. They pointed us to a state highway commission report from back then, which concluded that ODOT should stay far away from it because there was no money to be made after things like maintenance. The report went on to say that even if the state was given the bridge for free, it would not make financial sense for ODOT or others to own it. But something else happened around that same time. In 1949, the state legislature passed a law that allowed Oregon ports to build and operate toll bridges. So while ODOT looked at the Hood River Bridge and saw a money pit, the Port of Hood River saw the opposite.
So those tolls in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, in part, aside from taking care of the current bridge, actually went into investing in economic development in Hood River and in on the fabulously popular waterfront here in Hood River.
It was a similar situation for the Bridge of the Gods. The Port of Cascade Locks was the only interested buyer, and the tolls helped fund other port developments. The Hood River Bridge tolls still provide about 60% of the port's overall revenue, so replacing them wouldn't be easy, especially while the port is still maintaining the current bridge. Construction on the replacement is set to begin in about 2 years and wrap up in 2029. The new bridge will be owned by a new agency called the Hood River White Salmon Bridge Authority, but just like the port, it will not have access to gas tax funding. 20 miles downstream in Cascade Locks, the Bridge of the Gods is in better condition, and the port has no current plans to replace it. So in summary, don't expect the tolls on either bridge to ever go away. Up next on The Story, Super Bowl Sunday got us thinking about professional football here in Portland. Oh yeah. It was a thing back in the 70s and 80s, but it was short-lived. We're heading down to the KGW Vault with some help from the Oregon Historical Society when The Story returns. Some sad news to pass along tonight. The founder of the Bob's Red Mill Company, Bob Moore, died over the weekend at the age of 94. He leaves behind a successful healthy foods and whole grains company that many people in the Portland area and beyond know and love. Tim Gordon takes a look back at Moore's life.
This is what I was made for. I knew that. I really knew that. It didn't take me long to realize that there's nothing in this world that this is what I need to do.
The community is mourning the loss of Bob Moore, the creator of the Milwaukee-based company Bob's Red Mill, widely known as a natural foods entrepreneur.
If you're going to get the best out of life, you better get the best out of life.
Moore was a hard worker with big dreams at a young age, which ultimately led him to the 1978 opening of his Red Mill headquarters location with its iconic barn in Milwaukee. A successful company that now offers over 200 products in more than 70 countries. But his accomplishments never steered him away from enjoying the little things in life.
You've got 100 caps?
Yeah, I do. And I bought them all over the world.
That's your guilty pleasure. It's buying caps. I found it.
Moore was one of the guests on KGW's Carpool with Brenda Braxton. He enjoyed sharing his success story with us while also getting a quick workout in.
Chintzy. This is, yeah, okay, let's go. One.
And Moore was always looking out for others. He enabled more than 700 employees to own the Red Mill Company by establishing an employee stock ownership plan in 2010. On his 81st birthday. Moore was also named an honorary Beaver as he helped fund the Moore Family Center for Whole Grain Foods, Nutrition, and Preventative Health in the College of Health and Human Sciences at Oregon State University. Moore and his late wife, Charlie, also established research programs throughout the state, including the Bob and Charlie Moore Institute for Nutrition and Wellness at Oregon Health and Science University.
That's been on my mind for the last several years is to try to absorb as much as I can and not be in too big a hurry.
Company officials tell us Bob Moore passed away peacefully at home. He is survived by his 3 sons, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. The love of his life, wife Charlie Moore, passed away in 2018. A celebration of life is now being planned for a man who loved life and shared that with so many others.
It's Monday on The Story, and that means it's time to dig for old with the help from the Oregon Historical Society. And on the heels of yesterday's thrilling Super Bowl, with my hometown Chiefs yet again coming through for me, we decided to go looking for anything football related in the Historical Society's online collection. We only had 29 items to look through, and some of them only popped up because their description calls them football shaped, like that footstool at the top there. But 2 items grabbed our attention, both from 1985, a pin and a fob on a keyring advertising the Portland Breakers. Those of you who have lived here for a while may remember the Breakers, and if not, we found some old video highlights down in the KGW vault. The Breakers were a football team that played in the USFL, or the United States Football League, in the mid-1980s. Before coming to Portland, the franchise played in Boston and New Orleans. Starting in 1985, the Breakers were the Rose City's second try at a professional football team. In the 70s, the Portland Storm, which later changed its name to the Portland Thunder, played in the World Football League.
And on November 8, 1982, memories of the World Football League in Portland create hope of bringing a United States Football League team here. And sure enough, when the USFL debuts 2 years later, the Portland Breakers would take the field at Civic Stadium for a short but sweet existence.
Trick plays and all, just an electric crowd, right? 2 names you might remember, stars of the Breakers who played at Civic Stadium, halfback Marcus Dupree and tight end Dan Ross, among others. The Breakers hoped to play in Portland the following year in 1986, but the league tried to move to a fall schedule instead of spring football. The man behind that push, a New York real estate mogul involved in the USFL, his name was Donald Trump. It was little surprise that the National Football League, the ones behind that game that a lot of people watched last night, they didn't want another league competing in the fall. The USFL ended up canceling the '86 season and folding, and the Breakers would never come back to Portland. Well, that's the end of our show. Thank you so much for watching. The good stuff is coming your way next, and stick around for the late news at 11 o'clock. In the meantime, I hope you'll join me again tomorrow night right here on The Story. Thanks for being with us.